Welcome to the WagerTalk Podcast for the week ending May 20th. We've got a big show tonight as we've got Chris Andrews, Sportsbook Director from South Point Hotel and Casino. He's going to be stopping by to discuss college football week one lines, college football games of the year. Yeah, it's May, but we're going to be talking some college football on this show. We're going to take a look at the NHL Stanley Cup Final in Las Vegas. Yes, I did say Las Vegas. That just sounds, if I'm dreaming, don't wake me up. And I know every talk show host this week in Vegas has said that line. But it's exciting, Ralph. And I got Ralph Michaels here with me in studio. Dave Cokin's off this week. Of course, Mark Seidel behind the controls. And yours truly, Marco D'Angelo. Let's get this party started. We got a big show. Ralph, let's just jump right into it. Game 6, Boston, Cleveland, in Cleveland. You're the big Cleveland guy, longtime Cavs fan. You lived in Cleveland. I'm going to ask the question, is this the final game we see LeBron James in Cleveland in a Cavaliers uniform?
If you asked me that a few weeks ago, I would say 50-50, but at this point I would say 90-10, yes. I think what would have had to happen for LeBron to stay would be the Cavs to have won the championship and perhaps gotten the number 1 or 2 pick in the draft. They didn't move up in the draft. They are going to end up drafting 8th. But I think if LeBron had one of those superstars coming in, you won the championship, you had your supporting cast, that would be enough to keep him there. Obviously, his family's very important to him. His wife preferred to stay in the Cleveland area. They obviously have a huge home in Bath, which is a suburb between Akron and Cleveland. But with all that said, I think that we will probably have LeBron playing in Cleveland as a Cavalier the last time tomorrow night, Friday night.
Moving on to the actual game, and, they always say it's not really a series until the road team wins one of these games. The home team not only has won every game of this series so far, they've won and covered. It's been a total domination by the home team. Do you see that trend continuing tomorrow night in Cleveland in Game 6?
Well, the home team controlling it has been Boston throughout the entire playoffs. Cleveland has only been the dominant home team this series and against Toronto where they swept. In fact, the home team in Boston games is now 15-2 ATS. Boston covered a game in Philadelphia where they won outright, and they covered one game in Milwaukee where they lost. But Boston has been dominant at home. Boston is a team with 3 starters being 24 years old or younger. They don't have that go-to scorer on the road, but at home they play such good trapping defense. They know how to play the 3 defense, and those young guys find shots. On the road, they're a little bit different, where they've averaged 41% their last 7 road games when and they just are a different team away from TD Gardens.
You go back to Game 4, Ralph, and the Cavs took that first quarter big lead, and they needed it because the next 3 quarters, Boston won all 3 quarters. And, we talked about it on the videos yesterday when we did them at WagerTalk. This is a spot where, if I told you you could take a team +7 and you're going to win 3 of the 4 quarters, would you feel pretty good about that bet? And 100% of the time I would, but Boston, even though they won 3 of the 4 quarters, they ended up not covering because they dug themselves such a big hole in that first quarter and they couldn't get themselves out of it. Every time they got it close where they could get over the hump and maybe get that backdoor cover in Game 4, they couldn't get that big bucket they needed down the stretch.
Well, let's be honest. Both teams play differently when you're down 24-plus points in the first quarter. So, you look at the Cavs, and the Cavs actually had 60 rebounds in that game to 45 in that Game 4. So they were playing almost – you could say that the Cavs went to a prevent defense those last 3 quarters against Boston. So I'm not going to look into that and say, well, now Boston can play on the road and Boston can beat Cleveland outright on Friday. I'm going to take the wait-and-see approach and see what happens in the first quarter.
Yeah, good point. This might be one of those games that you sit there and do in-game wagering, see how they come out. But I got to tell you, I really do think that Boston right now, they got to feel good about themselves and where they're at. They know that, they're up 3-2. It's an elimination game. We know how good LeBron has been in elimination games, but this is a spot right now that when I watch it, and I know, LeBron is LeBron, but he, to me, at times looks like a guy that is fatigued from carrying a team on his shoulders, the entire season, basically this entire series. He's not gotten a lot of help. And again, last night you only had one other player in double digits for the Cavaliers, and that was Kevin Love. That's nothing new. They got to get another. They have to have that third guy that can get some serious scoring to make this team balanced, in my opinion.
LeBron looks tired when he scores. LeBron looks happy when he's giving out assists. But to give out assists, your other players have to score, or else you're not getting those assists. So when he has a triple-double or double-digits assists, you don't see the fatigue on him. You see him happy. You see him smiling. You see him playing defense much better than he does. If he's scoring, you're right, he's using much more energy. You see how many times he gets hit when he goes down there, how many three-point plays he has, how many times he gets hit. And, you may say, LeBron gets all the calls, but he is so big and powerful that there's a lot of calls that other people would get because they would get knocked over that don't phase LeBron. He doesn't change his body when he's getting hit going to the hoop, so they don't make those calls. So, those things take a lot out of him, both mentally and physically, as the games progress.
And, I agree with you 100% about, LeBron whenever he's dishing the basketball and that, and it lets him be able to play better defense on the other end. You look at him right now, and we've talked in this series, and we've talked about it with Boston in every round so far. It's been the same thing. Their perimeter defense has been absolutely tremendous. And once again, last night, they held Cleveland to 26% from three-point range, 9 of 34. If they don't have anybody else shooting, and LeBron's asked to do everything else, when you do show some of the signs of fatigue, where you're going to see it the most is in those three-point shots, because if you don't have your legs under you, we talked about it, on the videos yesterday as well, you're not going to can those big threes. And we saw some of that in the Golden State-Houston series, too, the other night, where, some of the Warriors looked a little fatigued in that game, and they weren't knocking down the threes. This is a big concern, I think, going into Game 6.
Well, and age. Again, we've talked about this several times. When you look at Cleveland, they are an old team. Kevin Young is the youngest player at 29. Kevin Love, excuse me. The youngest player at 29 years old. And Boston has 3 starters at 24 years or younger. And as with the Warriors and the Cavs, to go to the finals 3 straight years, you're probably playing 20 or 30 extra games in those years, and they start to add up year after year after year. So, yes, the Cavs are more tired than Boston. Yes, both Houston and Boston are younger, fresher, hungrier than the Cavs and the Warriors. But again, I think this comes down to, this is a series where I don't think the road team is going to win any game. I think the home team sweeps all 7. I think the Cavs get it done. Listen, the Cavs shot poorly at Boston. They've shot poorly at Boston throughout. But their last 4 home games, even against Boston, they're averaging 52%. Boston on the road averaging 41%. I think we get a home team go 7-0 straight up in this series.
All right, good stuff. Let's shift gears. Let's head right here to Las Vegas. And, and I'm sure Dave Cokin talked about it on the show, the radio show today. Everything continues to go the Golden Knights' way. We got the Game 7 to, we wanted whoever it was to have to play that extra game before we faced them. And then, of course, of the 2 teams, if Washington wins, we get home ice. If Tampa wins, we're on the road for Game 1. And, of course, Washington finds a way to go on the road and win Game 7 in dominant fashion over Tampa. So here we are with the Vegas Golden Knights hosting Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Final. It's just mind-boggling to believe. The lines for the series, you're looking at Vegas minus 150, Caps bringing back plus 130. And for game one, we're looking at Vegas as a $1.45 favorite. You've got over-under of 5.5, and it's juiced to the under, minus 125 on the under in that one. I'm going to start it with you, Ralph. Do you see Washington coming in here showing any signs, of the hangover from Game 7? They get a few days off. It's not like what happened with Winnipeg, where they had to come straight from Game 7. They had, just a day, to prepare, and boom, they're playing the Knights, and it didn't bother them. They came out and was their only win in the series against the Knights. But now at least Washington's going to get almost a full week. They're going to get 5 days from Wednesday to Monday before they have to play. How do you see them coming out after being extended 7?
Well, the benefit to the Knights is, even though they have 5 games, it's not nearly 5 days. I mean, because, you're playing on Monday, then you're traveling, you're playing on Wednesday at Tampa Bay, you're flying home, you're celebrating, you're taking one day off, and you're leaving for Vegas the next day. So, that travel helps Vegas, that they're having to do those things. But, in reality, if it wasn't for the Knights, I mean, Washington would be the Cinderella story. You're looking at a team that, in the past several years, they had a better team than they did this year. They won 55 games 3 years ago, 56 games 2 years ago, and this year they only had 49 wins. They were down quite a few notches, but they couldn't get over Pittsburgh. This year, they get over Pittsburgh. They beat them for the first time since 1994, and now all of a sudden they're a team that, you didn't expect them to be able to do what they did against Tampa Bay, who had the hotter goalie, who had the home ice. So, really it's the story of two Cinderellas. While Vegas takes the story away from the Capitals are a great story in themselves, having been in the league since 1974, only going to the Stanley Cup one time, which was 1998, and they, of course, lost that.
Yeah, you look at it, as far as hockey goes, the powers that be, I think they have to be ecstatic with the matchup that they ended up with, because you've got a big market in Washington. You've got a superstar, there in Ovechkin that has not, won anything yet. So you got that storyline. And then, of course, there's no better storyline than the Vegas Golden Knights. I mean, this is the sports story of not only this year, this might be one of the greatest sports stories of all time of what this team has done. I look at it, and you've got this Washington team. They exercise those demons of the Pittsburgh Penguins. They had lost 9 out of 10 playoff series to the Penguins. They finally beat the Penguins. Then they go and they play a Tampa Bay team, jump out 2-0 on the road, come home and lose the next 2 games, lose 3 in a row to be and be on the verge of being eliminated, and come back and win Game 6 and 7 and win Game 7 on the road. And we talked about it, that Game 7, which is absolutely mind-boggling. In the NBA, in baseball, Game 7s, home teams, it's almost like, money. Take it to the bank. But in hockey, it's not. They get over that hump. There they are. It's there for them to take. But what do they got to do when they come out on the ice? Even though they exercise the demons of the Pittsburgh Penguins, there's going to be one guy on the ice that they got to look at that was the big part of so many of those losing 9 out of 10 playoff series, and that's Marc-Andre Fleury. And there's not a goalie that was playing better hockey than he is this season.
Yeah, and let's look at his counterpart. We know Fleury has been lights out, by far the best goalie in the league. On the opposite end, you have Brandon Holtby for the Capitals. He actually got benched in the first round of the playoffs this year. He played 54 regular season games. He ended up playing in 16 playoff games, not starting all of those. And in those first 70 games, he had no shutouts. Then he becomes the 5th ever goalie in NHL history to shut out a team in Game 6 and Game 7, his first 2 shutouts of the year, and he held Tampa Bay without a goal the last 159 minutes of their series.
It's, like I said, for the NHL, they couldn't have asked for a better story, the storylines that you're going to have. This town's going to be nuts come Monday. I can't wait to see it unfold, and just look out. We've talked about it many times. If the Knights pull this off and win the Stanley Cup, Las Vegas Boulevard, the parade, the party, this whole town, stop and think about it. Vegas is a town that is about entertainment and production and go big or go home. Just look at the pregame shows that they put on, right before the teams come out on the ice. I just can't imagine what they're going to do for a championship for Lord Stanley if it happens.
We talked to Dave Cokin and I talked to Will Bernanke before the podcast on Las Vegas Sportsline. And he had said that, the Sharps are still coming and they still are trying to play against the Knights in certain situations. And, we know that the Knights are paying a premium here if you want to bet them because of the hometown ice, because of all the local money they're getting. But you got to remember, this Washington team, while they only had 49 wins on the year, in the playoffs, they did not play at full strength at all. Nicholas Backstrom, their third leading scorer, missed the first series. He finally came back. You have Andrei Burakovsky, who is their fifth leading scorer. He missed the first and second rounds. Came back game one against Tampa Bay, didn't play well. They benched him game 5. He finally got back to where he played, scored 2 goals in that game 7. So we're seeing a Capitals team that is finally playing to full strength. Their coach, Trotz, has made all the right moves as well. So I'm expecting one heck of a series. And, this Capitals team is going to be something that we've seen that it has more talent on the field this week when we play them on the ice than they've had during the entire playoffs.
All right, I'll put you on the spot. Who are you taking game 1?
I cannot bet against Fleury until he loses a game or until he starts to. He exudes confidence. It's contagious, and until there's a crack in that armor, I think you'd either be foolish to play against him, either play on him or don't play it at all.
Yeah, I agree with you, the Knights in game 1, but I have a feeling this first game is going to be more like we saw in the San Jose series. I think the Knights, their team speed is going to catch Washington by surprise at the beginning, and I think you're going to get a couple quick goals, and I think we could end up with a wide open game. And I'm going to go over the 5.5 for the first game.
One thing to remember is that the Knights have not had adversity in the playoffs.
Other than they lost the first game of the last series.
Right. It was a 7-game series. You lose one game, and that's fine. But, it'd be, again, I don't want this to happen, but if they lose game 1 and then go down 1-0 game 2 and an early goal, then we see what kind of team they are and how resilient they really are.
All right, guys, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we are going to be talking with Chris Andrews from the South Point. He is the sportsbook director of the South Point. We got some big stuff with college football to talk about. That's up next here on the WagerTalk Podcast.
It's Manic Monday, and that means every pick at WagerTalk.com is just $9. Get a play in any sport valued at up to $30 for just $9 each and every Monday at WagerTalk.com.
Welcome back to the WagerTalk Podcast, and I am excited for today's next guest. We've got Chris Andrews. He is the sportsbook director of the South Point Hotel and Casino. You can follow him on Twitter at Andrews Sports, and he's a good friend of mine. I've known him for a long time. Chris Andrews joins the show right now. Chris, I know you've been a busy man today, but thank you for joining the show.
Hey, my pleasure. We go back a long time, Marco, and always do a favor for a Pittsburgh guy.
Yeah, and you know what? We've got Ralph Michaels in studio with us, and I like the guy even though he's from Cleveland. Chris, there's a couple Cleveland guys here in Vegas that I like. He's one of them. You know the other one, Brian Leonard. So we'll let them slide for that. But
nobody's perfect, Marco.
No, you know what? You know what the best thing is about living in Cleveland? You're only 2.5 hours from driving to see 6 Super Bowl trophies.
There you go.
I got one question. Before we get into college football, We got a lot of people, Pittsburgh is a gambling town, and, a lot of followers and listeners. Me and you both being from Pittsburgh, I got to ask you a very big Pittsburgh question.
Okay.
Are Aiello's or Minio's pizza? That's the big Pittsburgh war, back there. You can't be both. You got to be on one side of the fence.
No, I got to be a Minio's guy, although I like Aiello's, but if I'm in downtown, if I'm anywhere near Squirrel Hill, it's Minio's for me. Sorry.
All right, I'm with you, buddy. I like to have that grease dripping down my arm from the pizza, and good stuff, buddy. Hey, we were teasing, you've had a busy day today. I mean, not just today. Let's back it up. This has been a busy week.
Yeah.
We're in it's only May 24th. We're talking college football. You opened up on Monday, Week 1, college football lines. You put all the numbers up. You brought the guys in and, explain to our listeners how this works. Obviously, you don't open up the vault and let them bet whatever they want, on these openers, but you have a system in place, and explain it to our listeners.
Well, we let them bet a dime a game, so $1,000 a game, and it's a decent bet for most guys. I know, a lot of sharp guys are certainly looking to bet a lot more if I let them, which I don't. But we take a dime to a number. We move it usually pretty good. A point, sometimes half a point if we're on the 3 or the 4 or the 6 or 7, but mostly we move it a whole point. Just we're trying to find a little bit of an equilibrium of where we should be, with the game itself and then with our power ratings too. And I give them 3 bets and you have to be here physically, 3 bets, and then go to the back of the line. And I just don't want one guy to be able to get 20 bets and he laps up all the gravy, and leaves nothing for anybody else. So I think that's a fair way to do it, and so that's how we do it. And we get hit numerous plays on a couple of games. So even if you miss maybe the best number, the second best number might not be so bad either. So, and God knows we've had plenty of play. We had a lot of play week 1, and we had even more today. So it was a lot of fun.
Chris, congratulations on being the first. I know it's a tough thing to do. I spent 15 years managing Phil Steele Publications and North Coast Sports, and we did those numbers. And can you walk through to our listeners, when you have a closing number, obviously you're looking at last year's team, how they finished, starters, coaching, recruiting, situations that happened, turnovers, injuries. Walk us through the factor of how you do your up-downs or how you get a team starting number from the end of one year to the start of the other.
Well, of course, I do look at last year, but, rather than just looking how they finished the year, I really want to see how did the whole year progress. Because you do get a lot of teams, you get some teams that get better as the year wore on, and you get some teams that got worse as the year wore on. And you got to look beyond that. Now, some teams that maybe got better as the year wore on, you think, what could have happened? Well, maybe it was just real good coaching. It finally took effect, and, we know important coaching is in college football and football in general. So that might be something that would carry over to the next year. Another team that maybe faded as the year went on, that gives you a little different story. Maybe they did have some injuries that made them go downhill. So when you start the next season, you don't necessarily want to judge them on where they finished, but more you want to get a good overview of how that team performed during the bulk of the year, and even during the beginning of the year may be a better indicator of just exactly how good you expect that team to be. But, of course, we never know how many injuries a team's going to get. Certain teams seem to get more over the course of time. And maybe it's not just injuries, it's depth, too. So you have to take all those factors in. But, of course, now you want to see who's returning. And I try to look at the offensive line as one of the very first things that I do. And, there's a lot of coordination goes with that. And a lot of times recruiting, I always said, if you're like 6'3", 275 coming out of high school and you're going to a Division I school, well, the first thing you find out, that kid's too small. So he's got to probably redshirt a year or maybe, beef up in another way, and might be a couple years before he's a starter. So you always want to look at that offensive line because I'm still, maybe I'm just old school, but I think that's where football begins. So start there, and then you look at the quarterback and returning production, and who's conversely who's on the defensive line and what kind of linebacking they have, and the game has changed quite a bit. I used to not put as much emphasis on the defensive backs, but now teams are throwing so much, you really have to look at those closely too. So it's a whole process, and I don't want to say there's just one factor that overrides everything else, but you got to take that all into consideration and do your best to come up with a value and give a power rating to a team. And I do my best, and a lot of guys think I'm wrong on a lot of teams. I'm sure we'll talk about a couple of them, but that's what makes it fun and challenging, and that's what we do here. So
Well, let's not forget that a lot of people thought you were wrong with Penn State, Michigan last year, and you proved all those doubters that you had the right number and they had the wrong number. So
who's that Mr. Detroit guy or something? That
well, yeah,
was crazy.
Yeah. Well, that's one of my questions that I have here. That he's not happy with you on the Notre Dame Michigan line. He wants to know what the hell you were thinking.
Well, it was a lot of scotches that night. No, I'm just kidding. Marco, sometimes you just look at things and maybe you looked at them one way, and then sometimes, a guy will explain, well, you got this factor, you got that factor. In all honesty, I think I underrated Michigan and overrated Notre Dame. And it was one of those things. I put out the number, and once they didn't waste much time betting on it. And the more I looked at it, I said, yeah, I think I'm not sure. I think I was wrong. I don't know if I was quite as wrong as the handicappers felt I was, but I could see where I did have to make some adjustments on both those teams. Gear Notre Dame down a little bit and Michigan up a little bit. Still think Notre Dame should be the favorite in that game, but we'll let them play and see what happens.
Chris, I can tell you this: that the first two people in line both made that their first play. But with that being said, you put out those Week 1 numbers. How much do you change your Game of the Year numbers based on the Week 1 action from the sharps that are at the front of the line?
Well, first of all, let me just say, the guys that come in, and most of them. I know I do my homework, and Vinny Miolo, he helps me too. He does his homework as well. But I also have to give a lot of respect to the guys that are betting me. And sometimes I have to go and reevaluate, and sometimes I make a pretty big adjustment, like I did with Michigan and Notre Dame. And other times I look and say, I'm not so sure they have the right idea here, and maybe make a slight adjustment. But for the most part, I do adjust after those guys bet me, because like I said, there's no way, like me, I can't know everything. And guys that come in and let's say you only had those 3 bets when you were in line. I have to give respect to you guys who came in and made those plays. I've got to figure you did your homework pretty good. And you know what? You got to swallow your pride sometimes when you're in this business, certainly as a bookmaker, and know that you're not going to make the perfect number, and you have to give some credibility to the guys who bet against you.
Well, the old saying, money talks and bullshit walks. The guys that come in and make the bets, that's the biggest indicator. And I don't want to date you, Chris, because you're and me, we're about the same age, not that much of a difference. I think you got a little bit on me.
A few years, yeah.
Okay. But what you've brought back to Vegas, that's what I want to say. I want to really, I'm not just blowing smoke up your butt, because you've brought back old Vegas. And by that, what I mean is a lot of the sports books around town, they're not as much run by bookmakers anymore as, bean counters. It's become very corporate, and you do things the old-fashioned way. And when I see stuff like this and being the first one out on something and taking that risk, man, it reminds me of the good old days. And I can tell you, when I was making my trips from Vegas, from Pittsburgh to Vegas all the time, my favorite casino, and it's no longer here anymore, but it wasn't because it was a fancy place, because it definitely wasn't. It's seen its better days whenever I started coming out here. But the Stardust, that was the place where, the official Las Vegas line. That's where it was originated from. And I can remember all those stories of the Sunday nights at the Stardust where, they brought that outlaw line out. Select people got the first crack at that number. And it was, the books back then were smart enough, to bring their numbers out. They made their stance. But then just like you want the smarter, the smart guys on the other side of the counter to come in and help massage those numbers before you open them up to everybody at the big, limits.
Well, I appreciate those thoughts, Marco. And then let me give some credit where it's due, too. When I first got here, which is about 2.5 years ago, and I knew Michael Gaughan. I worked for him back in 1980. By the way, my first job was at the Stardust in 1979. So I guess I carried some of that in my DNA, too.
I was graduating high school. Just letting you know how much of a difference there was between you and me, buddy.
I joke sometimes. My first horse bet involved the jockey. I think his name was Ben Hur. That was my first job, and then I worked for Michael Gaughan in 1980, and then moved up to Reno after that. But worked for Jimmy Vaccaro. But when I was working for Michael, his dad, Jackie Gaughan, used to come by, and Jackie just shared so much knowledge with me. And, I'd like to think I'm an old-time bookmaker. Jackie was really an old-time bookmaker, and he'd take a lot of action from guys. But I've always kind of carried that with me, so credit to Jimmy for kind of supporting me, and Michael Gaughan certainly, and Frank Toady, his partner here. They support me all the way. And when Michael hired me, he says, "This is your sports book. You run it the way you want." And I, of course, keep him posted on these things. But he loves that we take this kind of action. He loves the publicity that it's brought us, and we make a little bit of money with it, and that's what we try to do. But not to knock anybody in particular, but a lot of guys, you're right, they're bet takers. They're not bookmakers. And they take bets, and if the screen doesn't move, they don't move, and they don't really know how to move a number and do what they're supposed to do. But, I learned under some great guys, and, I'm not afraid to make book, and we put out numbers, and some guys, I hear on Twitter, that was terrible. That number moved 6 points. You don't know what you're doing. Well, that's called bookmaking, and you put out a number, and guys bet you, and you move it. That's kind of what we do in this business, or what you're supposed to do in this business. I think a lot of guys have forgotten that over the years. But we love doing it here. And, Marco, it's a lot of fun, too.
Oh, absolutely. And just where Ralph and I are going to pick your brain on a couple of these ones that definitely had some big movements on the games of the year today. We'll start with a game, intrigues me. You looking at the USC-Texas game on September 15th. USC, you guys opened them up as a 1-point favorite, and we saw that come all the way around to Texas is -3. And I'm going to kind of give you a two-part question on that one, because when you had the game of the week one lines, Texas was one of the big movers that week too, but that was moved the other way. They were betting Maryland.
Yeah, I don't know if that threw me for a loop or not. If you remember back to that game last year, I think Texas beat them by 10. Ralph probably remembers these better than I do. But I think Texas beat them by 10. But it was a dogfight the whole way, and I really thought Maryland probably should have won the game. So when I put that out, money again showed on Maryland. So I'm not sure I made any adjustment on Texas at all with my games of the year, or at least prior to this. But boy, Texas got bet on I think I have them 3 times on my board, and they got bet on every single one of them. So it looks like I probably did underrate them a little bit. Tom Herman, now he's there a couple years. I think it's the second year, I guess.
The second year, yes.
And, it looks like he probably has at least more of the guys, the athletes that he wants to have on that squad. But I've read some good things out of USC, and I certainly lowered them quite a bit from last year. But I'm not sure how far down they're going to be. So, they bet us on Texas, and I'm going to have to go take a look again once kind of the dust settles. Probably look at it tomorrow and Saturday. But I'm sure I have underrated Texas. I'm going to have to make some adjustments. But, you have to respect the guys that bet us. But I think the USC is going to show up for this game.
Chris, we did videos yesterday for WagerTalk, and we brought up that Texas game. I actually made that Texas-Maryland line 13. So I completely agree with your number in that I thought Texas would beat Maryland. Maryland, of course, started 4 quarterbacks last year, so they're coming back out of their injury system. But, when you're making these games of the year line, I just want to know, as a casual fan and actually someone that plays them as well, I know USC is in a horrible situation in that game. USC plays at Stanford the week prior, and then they host Washington State on Friday the week after, so they're in a Pac-12 sandwich. Are you breaking those down into that situation, or are you taking your numbers and making the line just from what you have looking at revenge and that type of situation?
I don't look that much there. I really kind of let my power ratings do the talking for themselves. And, some guys might think that's a flaw in the system, but I've talked to other guys, and they say, all that is really hard to predict. I know there's sandwich games, and coming off a big win or big loss could really affect the team. But, a couple guys that I've really talked to, I've always just kind of let the numbers speak for themselves. And, obviously there's some guys that greatly disagree with me and a few guys that agree with me. But, regardless, that's my system. And, it's been okay over the years, certainly not perfect. But, I'm going to kind of stick with that at this point.
Clearly one of the other teams that you probably, obviously you rated a little bit higher, and I can see where the Sharps are looking at betting against them. Central Florida, you hung up a number of 11 on Central Florida on the road at North Carolina, and we know the Cinderella season that Central Florida had last year, and, the system is what it is. They didn't get an opportunity to play for the national championship being undefeated, and then they lose their coach, which was Scott Frost. Nebraska getting Scott Frost, that program, I think, is going to turn around in a hurry. You're not going to see it full effects this year because he's got to get his recruits in there. But looks like the Sharps are expecting Central Florida to fall off the map the way they bet against them.
I know that's the expectation. I lowered them quite a bit. I was on Central Florida quite a bit last year. I had a lot of respect. Well, I love Scott Frost, as you just mentioned, Marco. I think that, I don't know if we'll see it this year. Probably not so much. But in a couple years, I think Nebraska, and I'd love to see them back up near where they were. I really do like Frost an awful lot. But I don't think they're going to drop off nearly as much as people think. And I think Carolina, probably not all that good. They weren't that good last year. I don't see a whole lot of improvement out of them this year. So that's one I don't think I'm going to make too much of an adjustment on that one. I don't think I'm raising North Carolina, that's for sure. I may lower Central Florida a little bit, but probably not too much in my power ratings. And I'll give you guys a tip out there. If you're looking to bet my season win totals, Central Florida is still going to be pretty darn high.
Chris, jumping back for one thought, Maryland actually beat Texas last year 51-41.
Oh, okay, so, you're right.
You had the margin right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had the margin right. I had the wrong winner, But, yeah, okay. Yeah, Maryland beat them. Okay. Marco, I said Ralph will know this better than me, but okay.
Obviously being an Ohio State fan, I'm going to jump to the Ohio State, Michigan, and Ohio State, Penn State. I actually made Ohio State personally. I made Ohio State pick against Penn State. They opened 1.5, went to 2.5. We know that's probably going to be the whiteout. We know is the whiteout the toughest home edge you give for any game, or do you give a home edge just for a team, or do you break it down game by game and adjust them?
Well, I got to tell you, I think Penn State probably has my highest home field advantage. I'd have to look. I know I have to lower Boise's. They weren't quite as good as they were under Chris Peterson. I'd have to look, though. But, yeah, I think there's certain games where it's a little higher. But as I say that, when I went through my numbers, I made Ohio State 3 over Penn State. Vinny made them a pick 'em. So I went right in the middle when I opened them up. So we are up to 2.5. Listen, I hate to give any credit to Ohio State at all. It pains me. But I do think 3 was the right number. I think they certainly are a better team. Listen, 3-point dogs win all the time, so I'm not saying Penn State can't win this game, but I did think 3 was probably the right number for this one. But I'm almost positive that'll be the whiteout game. And yeah, as much as I give Penn State for their home field, that's got to be the biggest home field of the year. Probably add an extra half a point for that one. But it's really turned into a pretty good rivalry over the last couple of years. Maybe not quite on the level. Well, it's not on the level yet of Ohio State and Michigan, but we're kind of heading there. That's pretty good, and pretty good recruiting wars too between Ohio and Pennsylvania. So I hope Franklin sticks around. I think Meyer's going to stick around at Ohio State. So I'm hoping this rivalry grows and the games continue to be as good as they've been the last couple of years.
Full disclosure for our listeners, Chris is a big Penn State fan.
Yeah, well, Rolf's a big Ohio State fan. I'll tell you what, Chris. I'm like I said, I'm going to just jump back to that game for one more second for Ohio State. Sorry, all these guys that are going to be tired of Ohio State, Penn State talk, but Ohio State plays TCU in Arlington 2 weeks prior.
Yeah.
But you have a first-time quarterback making his first true road start in Penn State at night on a whiteout. That's got to be the worst situation any quarterback can be in, making a first true road start.
I got to tell you, though, Urban Meyer's had some pretty darn good success with quarterbacks, going all the way back to Alex Smith, and he's had just a run of pretty good quarterback play. So whatever it takes to coach them up, he seems to have the formula. If I was an Ohio State fan, I don't think I'd worry too much about who's going to play quarterback. I think Urban's going to make the right decision and coach that guy up pretty good.
Chris, how hard is it when you're doing these ones, the games of the year, when you get to Thanksgiving weekend in those rivalry, because for me, that's the week that I close my stat books, okay? All my stats for the season I don't look at for that week because it's rivalry week. You got to handicap the games a little bit differently. Who's going where, who's not going where. And doing this at the beginning of the season, before you know all those intangibles, how hard is it putting up the numbers, or is this a case where you just put your power ratings and forget about it?
I'm a great believer in the power ratings, and I put them up, and, I know there's going to be some situations that dictate, a number's going to be way off, but I don't know what those situations are right now. I talked about it when I was just on VEASAN. You talk about, a team, let's say like Alabama and Auburn, they're playing that last week of the season. Both teams at this point, when I make my number, are priced for perfection. Now, we know right now, that's not the way college football works. Somebody's going to have an abundance of injuries. Somebody's going to be a lot better than we thought they were. Somebody's going to be a lot worse than we thought they were. But I don't know what that scenario is. So I'm just putting out the number that my power ratings indicate. And, guys are going to guess right on a few. They're going to guess wrong on a few. And, I'm willing to live with that because there's so many variables. We were laughing. Did you ever watch a season of college football? There's so many teams that are way better than you thought and a lot that just are way worse than you thought, and it's hard to predict that at this point in the season. But if you have a prediction, come on in, bring your money, and we'll take your bet and go from there.
Again, let me reiterate, Chris, congrats on putting on these numbers first, and the difference between doing what you're doing and being some of those corporate people that take bets. I mean, number one, a 24-hour sports book is incredible for us in Vegas. You work all different shifts, walk in anytime, 24/7, be able to place a bet. And also, number two, the accessibility of seeing you right behind the counter, right out front. Anyone can walk up, say hello to you, and it's just a different atmosphere there. And, congrats on that. My last point I want to ask is, if you are willing to share who you have as your top 4 teams in your power ratings, just, we know the Bamas, we know the Clemsons, we know the Ohio States. Can you list who you have 1 through 4?
Well, I got 1 through 3 is going to be Bama, Ohio State, and Clemson. And after that, I got about 3 or 4 teams I rate pretty close. I think probably Washington is my 4th team, but kind of breathing right down their necks would be, Penn State and Michigan. I think I have them rated the same. Oklahoma's right there. And so I guess my top 4, though, I think Washington is probably ahead of those other ones. So I'd say Bama, Ohio State, Clemson, and then Washington.
Chris, I got to thank you for taking the time. I know this has been just nonstop week for you, and then doing it on the day that you opened up these games of the year. Just incredible what you've done and what South Point is doing. And I'm going to shift over here to Ralph 1 second. He's like bouncing up and down here. He's got one more question for you.
Not even a question. For those people in town, Chris, tell us about the season win totals when you're opening them, and for those people to see what all the excitement's about.
Well, we'll open those Sunday morning at 11 o'clock, and it'll be the same scenario. First hour, you got to be here at the South Point, dime a rattle, and you get 3 bets, and then go to the back of the line. And I'm sure we're going to do plenty of business there. That's really, of all, we're busy today. We were busy on Monday with this first week. That's when we're really busy, is the season win totals, because we do every team. And that's an awful lot of work, and I hate to say you're going to have a lot of things that I'm going to do that you're going to disagree with, and that's just kind of the way it goes, and that's our business. We take bets and move the numbers, and that's what we're going to do that day. But I'm sure we're going to have a lot of bets.
The one advantage you have, everybody has an opinion, but we have to lay an extra 10% to voice our opinion.
But you also get your choice on which one you want to bet. There's a lot of choices up there.
There is. Hey, Chris, I want to tell our listeners, follow you on Twitter. It's at Andrew Sport. You're always on there. You're giving a lot of good information. You tweeted one thing out last night. Last thing I'm going to send you away with. Can I get a bet on that one hot dog a week from the cart?
No.
Max bet. I want the over because I know you are not eating just one hot dog a week at the South Point hot dog cart. Come on.
There's no way you're going to lose if you bet over because it's going to be at least one, I can tell you that. So you're either going to win or push. I mean, if I'm not feeling well that week or something like that, you might get a push, but you figure to get a win, I can tell you that.
The only way that he is not eating more than one hot dog a week is if he's eating at Michael's 3 times that week. That's the only way.
I saw something about a tweet for a hot dog and a Heineken for $1 each. I want that action.
That was the old days when I was in Calneva. Yeah, it was really funny. We used to laugh, and the Heineken salesman would come in, and we sold Heineken literally out of like a garbage bucket filled with ice, and the guy serving it. We didn't have these sexy little waitresses around I think they were ex-felons with tattoos and all that other stuff, and we still sold more Heineken, really, than any single place in the country. It was unbelievable. Those were the old days in Reno, and I think they're kind of gone for now, at least at Calneva, unfortunately.
You still working on that book, buddy, with all your stories?
It's pretty much at the publishers now. We have a final proof to come out, and Marco, I think there even may be a picture of you in that book.
Oh, that's
I sent him a bunch of pictures. We'll see what the editors come up with. But,
all right. Well, I'll tell you what. I'm expecting a signed copy, buddy.
Okay, we'll see. It should be out soon, I hope. So I talked to the editor just yesterday. So hopefully we get the final edit. We'll approve it and go from there.
Well, when that book comes out, I want you to come in and do videos, and we can show the book and just tease a story or two because. If you I'll tease right now. If you love Vegas and old stories about this town, you might even be able to tell us where a couple bodies are buried. I don't know.
No, I'm not. No. Some of those guys are still alive that buried those bodies, and I don't want to be mine right next to them. So.
All right. Okay. Chris, have a great day. Enjoy the rest of it. And as always, buddy, thanks for coming on, and I look forward to talking to you real soon.
Thanks, Chris.
I'll talk to you guys soon. See you later.
All right. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Ralph, I could talk to that guy all day long. The stories, just absolutely love it. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, it's almost anticlimactic to go from Chris Andrews to talking about Major League Baseball. But, hey, we want to make some money,
Winning is never anticlimactic, Marco.
But it's true. All right, we'll be back in a second.
Every Tuesday, WagerTalk.com offers a best bet selection from its hottest handicapper. It's a great way to introduce yourself to WagerTalk.com with a big best bet winner for just $2 on $2 Tuesday.
Welcome back to the WagerTalk Podcast. We're going to head to weekend baseball action. Ralph and I is going to break down Some big games for the weekend, and we're gonna start it off, Ralph, with a big one here, and we might even bring in Mark Seidel behind the mic there. He's running the board. I know he always has something to say when we're talking Houston Astros, and he still has that smile on his face from the World Series. I don't think it's left him yet.
I don't think it's the World Series. I think it's the beer I owe him for losing 2 out of 3 when the Indians lost to the Astros last weekend.
I am parched.
Hey, it is a desert here. We need some beverages. We've got Keuchel and Kluber. A couple years ago, this would have been an absolute marquee matchup with Dallas Keuchel going against Corey Kluber. Keuchel's not what he was. He's shown signs that he can still be that, but more often he's the 4th or 5th starter on this rotation. He didn't start there this year, but what can you say, Mark? Everybody else is just pitching so phenomenal for this team.
And I don't think that Dallas Keuchel is necessarily pitching bad. His ERA is sub-4, so it's not as if he's just out there throwing beach balls. He's just not. This Houston offense, for as lauded as it was last year, it hasn't stepped up like that. They do lead the major leagues and run differential, but if this lineup hits anything like they were hitting last year, then we're talking about a team that could, already have sewn up divisions and things like that. But their pitching has been so good that it has made up for the lack of hitting. And like I said, Dallas Keuchel, I don't think he is. He's performed the worst out of the starting 5, but that's actually saying a lot about the rest of the staff compared to Dallas Keuchel.
Keuchel not even sub-4, sub 3.5. He's got a 3.43 ERA.
Yeah.
There are teams that take that as a 1 or 2 starter. Yeah. Let's talk Mets or Cincinnati.
Okay, well, yeah, but you've got Verlander on the top of the heap, who's just been lights out. Garrett Cole's pitched as well as Verlander's pitched, but he doesn't have the wins as Verlander's had. Garrett Cole, and I knew this was going to happen.
Thanks, Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I knew it was going to happen.
You gave him out as what?
I said
a Cy Young long shot on a video earlier this year.
I said take the win total. I think he was at 14 wins. The Cy Young's going to hurt because Verlander's on that team. They're going to split. If they continue to go the way they're going, Verlander's going to get just on name alone, and then he's got Kate Upton. So that's a tiebreaker.
He's a real MVP. That's the real MVP.
That's you throw a shutout. The other day you threw the shutout. You got the win. You're happy as could be. You go home, kick back. You got Kate.
Yeah.
Come on, life's good.
Life is really good.
You talk about this one here, but Corey Kluber, head to you, Ralph. We know the consistency we're going to get with Corey Kluber. Sometimes he doesn't get any run support. It's just got to be frustrating for him with the Indians that, he pitches as well as he does, and he finds himself in those 2-1 ball games all the time. How do you see this one breaking down?
Well, this year he actually has had the run support. He's had 5.56 runs per game. But you look at Kluber, there's not a better pitcher in baseball. You may say Kershaw, for a period of time. In his last 34 starts, he's allowed 4 earned runs once. Every other start was 3 earned runs or less. So 34 starts, basically a full season. Your worst performance is 4 earned runs right there. And you look at him, 7-2 with a 2.36 ERA, a 0.84 WHIP. Oh, yeah, that's because he's so lousy on the road. He's got a 2.81 ERA on the road. He's 1.76 at home. 72 innings pitched, 51 hits, a 4-0 run. I'll tell you, the odds are huge on Kluber, but I could not bet against Kluber at home, even with your money, Marco.
No, absolutely. I got to agree with you on this one. There's some other matchups in this series that I will disagree, and I'll be on my buddy Mark's side. I'm sitting in between these two guys right now, so I want to stay on the good side of both of them. Because, Mark could snap me in half, and Ralph, I just don't want you to jump on my lap. So that's we'll move along here on that one. I agree with Cleveland for this one. Let's go to Saturday. Now you guys can pick on me with my Pittsburgh Pirates. We've got the St. Louis Cardinals coming to town. You've got Flaherty and Williams going for Pittsburgh. as we are doing this Thursday night, the Pittsburgh Pirates have lost 5 of their last 6 games, Ralph. This is a team that I didn't expect to be in the hunt this year. They're in the thick of it. Now they've lost 5 of 6. Is this going to be the unraveling of the Pittsburgh Pirates, or is this just one of those little mini slumps?
Well, I think they played over their heads a little bit. I think this is just a little bit of a regression, but I still think that they've proven that they can throw some pitchers out there. They can get enough hitting done. Looking at this game on Saturday with Flaherty and Williams, Flaherty's a 22-year-old kid who made 5 starts last year when he got pulled up. He went 0-2 with a 6.33 ERA, never pitched more than 5 innings, so he was a relief guy. Made a few spot starts just to try to get him to the 4th or 5th inning. But now he's off his first win. He's made 5 starts this year. He's 1-1 with a 2.31 ERA, broke his maiden, got his win against Philadelphia. It's the first time he's ever pitched over 5 1/3 innings. He went 7 innings, so they're starting to expand him. And, it's a kid you have to look at. In high school, Flaherty, his last 2 years in high school, went 23-0 with a .63 ERA. So, again, he had dominant stuff when he was young. You're starting to see him make the transition here. On the flip side, Trevor Williams, you look at his season-long numbers, they look nice. 5-2 with a 3.05 ERA and a 1.08 whip. But in April, he had 6 starts. He went 4-1 with a 2.29 ERA. His last 4 starts, he went 1-1 with a 4.1 ERA. He had 1 good outing in May. He pitched 7 shutout innings. In his other 3 starts, 16 2/3 innings, 11 earned runs, 17 hits, and 5 home runs. So he gave up 1 home run in his 7 starts, 5 home runs in his other 3 starts. So I see a progression on Flaherty. I see a regression on Williams.
I agree with everything you've said, but I'm going to point out 2 things. This is a day game on Saturday, 4:05 start. Pittsburgh, day games, 13-7 this season. So I'm going to look to the Pirates here for that one on the Saturday game. I'm also going to point out the good that you said about Flaherty with the last outing. The bad of that is not only did he go longer than he's gone all year, he had 13 strikeouts. And although 13 strikeouts, he had his great stuff. That's true. You did. And strikeouts is the best indicator of you fooling the hitters. But when you have that many strikeouts, you're going deeper in pitch counts to get the strikeouts, okay? They're not all 3 swings and a miss. You're going deeper in the pitch count. And I think that sometimes whenever a guy has that jump in the pitch count, you're going to see not as effective the next start. He's not, maybe he loses a half a mile an hour on velocity, whatever. I'm going to take the shot with the Pittsburgh Pirates in this one. They handled St. Louis earlier in the season when the Cardinals came to town, and that's what kind of propelled the Pirates on into that first-place run when they had for a while. I'm going to go with the Pirates on Saturday. Moving to Sunday, we've got Toronto and Philadelphia. J.A. Happ's going for Toronto, and you've got Pivetta going for the Phillies. Ralph, J.A. Happ, this is a guy that you look at his career numbers, they're average. They're not bad. They're not great. They're average. But when he gets hot, this guy gets hot, and he seems to continue to roll with those. He'll string several good starts together, and he has just been absolutely dynamite. He's gone 7 innings in each of his past 2 starts. He's allowed just 2 runs on 5 hits, 3 walks over that span. And he's averaging right now, career high for him, 10.8 strikeouts per 9 innings this year. I like him going into Philadelphia, but you also got the Philadelphia pitcher coming off his best outing of the season.
Pavetta's not only coming off his best outing, in his last 3 starts, 19 innings, 10 hits, 1 run, and a 25-2 strikeout walk ratio. Just amazing. Now, he did pitch against San Francisco and Baltimore, 2 inferior offenses, did face Atlanta, which was a good offense. But to me, this is really a road-home dichotomy pitching matchup. Hap 6-3 with a 3.97 on the year, but at home he's got a 4.91 ERA. On the road where he is today, he's got a 1.93 ERA. You look at Pivetta at home, a 2.0 ERA. On the road, a 5.82 ERA. So both pitchers in their preferred roles in this game. Pivetta almost 3 runs fewer on the road. Hap 3 runs fewer on the road. Pivetta almost 4 runs fewer at home. So I'm going to look at this one. You look at Toronto, they've completely disintegrated. I mean, what they've done in their last 20 games has been horrendous. The bats aren't hitting. Hap has pitched well. I do like the under in this game between Toronto and Philadelphia.
All right, I'm going to lean slightly to Toronto in this one. We'll see where the number comes on this one on Sunday. I'd like to get Toronto as, possibly a slight underdog in this one, and that's where I'll be looking. But I cannot disagree with you on the under, Ralph. All right, we're going to take our last break of the night, and when we come back, we're going to take a look at a best bet from both Ralph and myself. We'll be right back here on the WagerTalk Podcast. Welcome back to the WagerTalk Podcast. This is the home stretch. It is best bet time. Our best bet's 12-7 on the run here. We had 2 no plays last week. Ralph, you won your play last week, but Dave and my play got nixed because of
pitching changes.
Changes. Well, that's what happens whenever you do a podcast on Thursday. You got some rainouts, you got some managers changing things around, shuffling lineups, and they pushed Greinke back a day. So, it's better to have a no play than to have a loser. So, but it's not as much fun as having a winner like you did. So we're going to start off with you because you were the winner last week, and you got a Saturday play for us. You're going to Major League Baseball. You're going to take a look at Atlanta at Boston, pitching matchup, Newcomb versus Pomeranz. What are you looking at?
A pair of lefties, and while often people don't look at night and day, and some people don't look at lefties and righties, but the Braves absolutely bash left-handed pitchers. They are number 1 in batting average by almost 20 points against lefties. They are number 1 in slugging, hitting .483. Boston facing a lefty. They're a much better right-handed hitting team. Boston is number 24 in slugging at .382. That puts the Braves over 100 points higher in slugging. You look at the pitchers. Sean Newcomb, 5-1 with a 2.39. While that sounds like Cy Young material, in the month of May, he's 4-0 with a 0.36 ERA. 25 innings, 1 run, 9 hits. Flip side, Pomeranz 1-2 with a 5.97 ERA, a 1.8 whip. And you look against lefties. Boston at home against lefties this year, although they've been a sizable favorite in all 3 games, they're 1-2. Braves on the road against lefties, 8-1. We're going to get this situation as a dog, and I'm going to be on Atlanta with Newcomb Saturday against Boston.
Atlanta's been a team, Ralph, talked about it several times. They have been one of the most underrated teams in baseball this year. They're the surprise team. If you flat bet them, they're like 1 or 2 as far as net profit for the season. Don't sleep on the Atlanta Braves. They're playing good baseball right now.
They reminded me of the Indians back in the mid-'90s. They're a young team. They're calling up these 20 and 21-year-old prospects. They're coming into the right environment where they're growing and they're learning and they're performing. And when you have that kind of situation, it really becomes contagious throughout the dugout. So, I think Atlanta is a live team the entire year, and it still may take a few more weeks until they get the respect from the line makers they deserve.
All right, I'll apologize to our Atlanta listeners that Ralph just said you're going to have a decent team but never win a championship. Comparing them. And I want to bring up, before I get to my best bet, after we got off the air, Chris texted us back, Chris Andrews, and said, oh, my God, I forgot one of the teams when you asked me about who my top 4 was. He had to add Georgia in there as one of the top 4 teams. And
Bulldog fans, don't attack Chris. He didn't leave you out. He just forgot about you for 1 second.
Yeah. I think the hot dog cart went by his office, and he was looking at that. So I'm going to go to Monday night. We're going to look at Game 1, Stanley Cup Final here in Las Vegas. I mentioned when we broke this down earlier, I think that this number of the 5.5 is too low. I think this series, we talked about it when we did the videos. Ralph, I said if it's Vegas and Tampa, it's going to be an under series. If it's Vegas and Washington, it's going to be an over series. And I think you're going to see more of the Golden Knights playing their style of hockey where it's going to be more wide open. They're going to use their team speed that they like to use and create. And the fact that Washington did have to go to 7 games, their legs, they're not going to have their legs as much as the Knights, who had the extra rest, has had these short series all the way through. I mean, think about it. You've had you had the sweep against the Kings. You had the short series against San Jose, and you had the short series against Winnipeg. Yes, we've got the best goaltender, hottest goaltender in there with Marc-Andre Fleury, but I think it's going to be the Knights that are going to put some goals up, and then even if we're sitting at a tight game at 3-2, we've seen it already happen. That empty netter, get it to 6. I think 5.5 is the way to go. And right now, you can get that at plus money, plus 105, taking the over 5.5 goals on Monday night. That's going to wrap up this week's show. Dave Cokin will be back with us next week. I want to thank Ralph for joining me in studio. Of course, thank our man behind the controls, Ralph. Ralph, you want one more thing?
No, everyone just have a very happy and safe Memorial Day holiday. Drive very safe. We know a lot of people are out on the road, so keep that in your minds.
I appreciate that, and I ditto those sentiments. Want to thank our man behind the booth there, Mark Seidel. He makes us sound fantastic. If you ever heard our real voices, you would understand that. And then, of course, Johnny Detroit. He's the guy that gets this podcast out everywhere. I mean, Ralph, it seems like every week we're on another station, another network for him to get us more exposure. So appreciate that, Johnny Detroit. I'm your host, Marco D'Angelo. I want to thank you guys, the listeners, because if nobody was listening, we wouldn't be doing this, and you guys are letting us know you like what we're putting out, and we will continue to keep providing sports betting content at WagerTalk.com. So till next week, guys, let's cash some tickets. We'll talk to you next week.